This podcast is sponsored by Pax. Whether on the water, on land or in the air, Pax bags are both versatile and flexible backpacks that are perfectly suitable for your requirements in the most demanding of environments. Pax bags are highly regarded due to their exceptional performance in pre-hospital and in critical care environments. Their well-organised compartments and customisable configurations enhance efficiency in high-stress situations. They're designed with infection control in mind and are easy to clean and disinfect. So highly visible colours and reflective strips aid quick identification and adherence to quality standards, ensuring reliability. So the versatility of Pax bags caters to diverse EMS providers, and they deliver vital equipment, durability and ease of use for pre-hospital critical care services globally. I've used Pax bags in a number of critical care situations, and they're absolutely excellent, both in identification of kit, but also in identification of the reflective strips to ensure visibility. So please see the show notes for further details.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be speaking with Paramedic Adam Desmond around major incident reflections. So Adam is a seasoned paramedic of 30 years experience, and in this episode what we want to do is really just dissect his anecdotal experience on major incidents over the course of 30 years. He's attended 5 major incidents in his time, including Brixton nail bombing in 1999, the Soho nail bombing in 1999, the Ladbroke Grove rail crash in 1999, but also the London terror attacks, the 7/7 attacks in 2005, and the Westminster Bridge terror attack in 2017. So this is a slightly different interview because Adam really does give his anecdotal experience. It's quite visceral, if I'm being honest, and this is a trigger warning. There is some extremely harrowing stories in this episode, so if that's not something that resonates with you, please do feel free to stop the podcast here. But there is some visceral stories and very emotive stories in this episode, understandably from his experience. There's also swearing in the episode. I just wanted to mention that so it doesn't surprise anybody. We also want to mention that Adam's views are his own. So he's speaking of his time in London Ambulance Service and his time spent clinically in London. But the views he delivers and posits in this episode are indeed his own views. And it's important to remember that. Adam has delivered a talk 16 times to colleagues across London Ambulance Service on his reflections, both on human factors and in major incidents. And he talks quite viscerally in these sessions, really, of how profound the human factors interplay is in major incidents. Please do bear this in mind. It's a fantastic insight from Adam because he really does land some really clear salient points around major incidents, I find it very informative to speak to him, both as a colleague that went with him on that day through 7/7, but also just in reflection some of the wider principles that he has interacted with and indeed thought about retrospectively. Okay, enough from me. I hope you find this episode both informative and insightful. Welcome to the podcast, Adam.
Hello, mate. Thank you very much for asking me.
It's great to have you back, actually. Adam, I just wondered if we could just get you to share your background and experience in major incidents. I've reeled off the major incidents you've been involved in, but I think just fundamentally, there's a lot more to be said about that. Could I just get you to do a brief synopsis of your experience?
Well, I joined the ambulance service in 1995. Joined the London Ambulance Service, the LAS, in 1995. Started off at Camden Ambulance Station for 3 years. Then in 1998, I applied to be a duty officer in an acting role and was successful. So from 98 to 99, I was an acting duty officer working out of Deptford Ambulance Station. Then I went for promotion in another service, actually, and I was in a control room environment there for about 15 months. And didn't really enjoy that. It didn't fit me. Control room environment. I think it's very much still operational and at heart. So I came back to London in 2001 to now. Whereas when I came back to London, I was Bloomsbury Ambulance Station in Soho, 2001, 2012. And since 2012 to my present to present day, I've been with the what we call the Tactical Response Unit for London Ambulance Service. And as you've said, I attended Brixton and Soho nail bombs, Ladbroke Grove train crash, 7/7. 7/7 was a biggie, as you can imagine. I know you were there as well with me, mate. 7/7 changed my life, changed me as a dad, as a husband, as a man, brother, son, and as a clinician, without shadow of a doubt. Changed the way I practiced after 7/7. And then Westminster Bridge attack, 2017. And for about the past 15 months, after encouragement from my wife, who's also a paramedic with London, I've been invited as a guest speaker on human factors in major incidents all across London, delivering a talk about the policy and the reality. The policy is a very good policy. People often think I'm slagging the policy off. I'm not slagging the policy off. It's a really, really thorough, well-written, sensible, good policy. My argument is that the reality will never allow the policy to exist.
There has been a real shift over the past 5 to 10 years, actually, and you can bear witness to this. Certainly, having been privy to the London Bridge attacks, around using road traffic vehicles instead of as weapons rather than blast and ballistic incidents, which in a way has got its own problems because it's so hard to mitigate against these kind of vectors. It's hard to stop these kind of attacks. Could I get you to speak to this real shift?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've definitely seen a change in the style of attack. It's become less sophisticated, but as effective. So we were seeing certainly in the late 90s the use of bombs and guns more. And thankfully now it's very, very difficult to acquire a gun in this country, particularly a handgun. It's really hard to get hold of. And making bombs, that sort of stuff is monitored online if you start buying things that you can make a bomb with. So it's trickier, certainly. I'm not saying they can't do it because we saw with Manchester they definitely can. But I think it's more difficult. And so, as such, the terrorists have adapted their way of working. And what we've seen with the lone wolf attacks is that they're very, very hard to stop, if not impossible, because they probably aren't motivated by others. They're motivated by the news or what they've seen in their own life, and it's a very personal thing for them. And yeah, they have to do something as sort of risky as hiring a car or a van, and they're ready to go. So we're seeing now blunt trauma as opposed to penetrating trauma as being the main cause of injury, and fewer bomb blasts in injuries. So Nice, for example, again, I'm going global. Nice, the lorry attack was blunt trauma, but devastating and more effective. Actually, that one man with a lorry, from his point of view, was more effective than 7/7 with 4 bombs, in that he killed more people. If you're measuring it by body count, he was more successful. So yeah, there's definitely, and we're also seeing an increased risk from the extreme right wing as well. We saw the chap from Wales with Finsbury Park Mosque, where he drove his van, came down from Wales. He was from reading up on that chap. He was singing songs with his kids the night before. You know, the neighbors heard him just having a laugh with his kids playing music, and the next day he's doing that. So they're really, really hard to see coming, and they are definitely less sophisticated, but as effective, if not sometimes more effective.
So just looking at, and like you said, it's really hard because there is this almost polarization and of individuals, and it's hard to, like you said, articulate and mitigate against. Could I get you to speak to the human factors? It's something me and you have both experienced, this florid human factors at these events, and how we spoke on the World Extreme Medicine podcast
Yeah.
just a couple of days ago, and it's almost akin to drinking half a bottle of vodka, then going into the worst incident of your life, because your bandwidth, your peripheral vision, your hearing loss, your ability to hold any kind of conversation or concentration. Could I get you to speak to just what just some of your observations and experiences on human factors?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. Human factors are massive. Human factors years ago, they would bring down aircraft, human factors would, because a first officer was too scared to challenge the captain sitting next to them. The first officer knew the plane was plummeting to the ground. They knew how to stop it, but they're too scared to challenge the captain and say, we need to do this. So human factors are enormous. As I think I said the other day, the brain can't move from normal life to the opposite extreme very well. And unless you've done, I don't know, 3 or 4 tours with the military. Um, uh, the SAS lads who I've worked with always say the same thing. They say what we're really, really good at is going from normal life to becoming really, really violent very, very quickly, and then going back to normal life very, very quickly. They have the ability to do that, which makes them very effective. So unless you've got that kind of background, which not many of us have, you are going to really struggle if you find yourself going into one of these incidents. Human factors will be influenced by the confusion that you're suffering, for one thing. You can't train for fear as well. I've said that before. Fear, all of the major incidents I've attended, I've been scared. And all the training sessions I've had, all the major incident training sessions I've been on, I've never been scared once. In fact, they're often quite a laugh, aren't they? We have a bit of a laugh. You see friends you haven't seen for a few months. You go to the pub afterwards, and it's a nice day out, the training day. These major incidents are certainly not a nice day out. So you can't train for fear. You can add confusion in training sessions, but you can't ever appreciate the level of confusion you're going to have. They evolve slowly, these incidents, and it's not until you find yourself at the source, at the pathology of that incident, that being 7-7, the bombed out carriage, or Manchester, the City Hall, that you truly understand what's happened, and you decide for yourself what's happening then. And then it can sometimes, your bandwidth can open a bit because the confusion reduces. The fear doesn't, but the confusion does. So the brain can't do what you're asking it to do in one of those situations. So and communication between our control room and us on the day, that affected my bandwidth and human factors, because they weren't answering the radio. They weren't able to, because their bandwidth had failed, because the 999 system had lit up, and that's not a normal day for them either. So it fails between you and your control room, it fails between you and your crewmate, and it fails between you and your emotions. The communication between the other emergency services will fail, because they'll be going through the same situation that you're all going through. The public that you encounter, they won't be able to comply with reasonable requests, because they've seen something they were never supposed to see on that day. Their bandwidth will have shrunk, so their human factors are affected. When Sam and I arrived at King's Cross on 7th of July, 4 people just let themselves in the back of our ambulance when we got there. They just opened the back doors and got in and sat down. I asked them what they were doing, and they didn't answer me at all, because they didn't have the ability to do a conversation because of what they just witnessed. So at 7-7, the things that affected me, my bandwidth and my ability to do my job, were no comms, seeing when we arrived a police inspector being carried like a baby to a police car because he was crying hysterically, not being able to understand how to use the escalators. I couldn't understand which escalator was the one going down, because two were coming up, one were going down. They were all silver, they were all the same color. I just stared at them, and Sam had to put me on the right one. The heat in the tunnel, 40 to 50 degrees. Do you remember, mate? 40 to 50 degrees heat. Approaching the train, the fear as we walked towards that train, the injuries to the patients we saw, arguing with the LFB at the platform because they wouldn't come in with us, the devastation of the bomb carriage and everything we saw when we got in the bomb carriage at 7-7. So it's not a normal day. And you, everything is changing so quickly. You, I'd be, as I said, unless you've got that level of experience of dealing with those environments, I'd be amazed if any of us could ever remember a policy on a day like that.
No, listen, you make some key points there, Adam. And like you said, I mean, it's an assault on the senses, as you said. The heat, the noise,
Yeah,
and sometimes the lack of and then the injury pattern,
yeah,
the enormity, sort of the demand versus supply, the atypical like things you see, like you said, on the day, and all these things are starting to overwhelm you, and also the circuit breaker of, like you said, not being able to a run-of-the-mill day, you communicate with the Emergency Operations Centre, the EOC, on a regular basis, but
yeah,
losing comms
yeah,
and this thirst for knowledge or thirst for information, which just isn't there yet when you're a first responder,
yeah.
because no one else has reported this. So there is no methane report until you get there. There is no formula until you're there. And I think, as you said,
Really? Oh, would you not say, Owen, there's no formula until it's over? I mean,
yeah, well, indeed,
it was really
indeed.
only when I came up 3 hours later or whatever it was at King's
Yeah.
Cross that the system was in place. And as I said at the beginning, I agree with every word of the system, of the policy. I agree with all of it. We need to sort out parking. We need to sort out loading. We need to have help, the safety factors involved. But when we first get there, we first of all need to deal with the dead and dying. That's our priority. We can do parking afterwards, in my opinion. In my opinion. I should add, all of this is my opinion and not necessarily my employer's opinion, but my opinion. Okay. And I'm happy to take it on the chin if someone disagrees with me. But I just, yeah, I spoke to Sam last night actually, and the guy I was working with on the day, and we both kept coming up with the same word about 7-7. We both felt lonely.
Yeah,
We both felt lonely.
yeah.
We got split up quite quickly, and after that, we were just so alone.
Yeah, well, if I'm being honest with you, Adam, I was working with Ken Murphy on the day. I've done a podcast on it, and I'll put that in show notes. But essentially, he was I'd only been a year qualified at the time, just over a year, and I had, he was my, I was a bit of a sheep at that time, understandably. I just was really still trying to hone the trade, but and we were together in Aldgate, and that was probably a saving grace for me. Got split up by the time we got to King's Cross, but we stayed together as a crew in Aldgate. And to your point, I it was really difficult. The train was not a platform, so there's a meter and a half off the ground,
Yeah,
off the
yeah,
track. It's hot. It's really difficult to discern who's dead, who's alive. And that sounds crazy to say that, but actually, the priority one patients we casualty evacuated, we removed, looked dead but had a pulse. So they weren't, we could get a semblance of groaning, and I could barely feel a pulse, but could. So there is, and the light was a challenge. It was really peaceful, if I'm being honest. There was no screaming or shouting. All the people that could have walked or run had done so, but and peaceful maybe isn't the right word, but there wasn't
it's
much
quiet.
noise. It was
Quiet.
quiet.
Yeah.
But we did get split up when we went to King's Cross, and that was daunting for me. But I'm going to move on to Manchester, but just before we do, because it is a 7-7, and we spoke about this the other day, it was a seminal event. It was, on UK soil, it's been the most significant terrorist attack in history. And your account was extremely visceral. It actually stayed with me since the other day, since I spoke to you the other day, because it not only was so visceral, but to your point, Adam, you just said you went from 5 miles an hour, normal cadence of business as usual. I think you said you'd attended someone with DMV just before,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you'd brought them to UCH,
yeah,
University College Hospital, and then you went to 100 miles an hour,
yeah.
into, like you said, pretty much hell on earth. I just think just before we do move on to Manchester, could you maybe just unpack, maybe just for a couple of minutes, maybe 3, 4 minutes, just for listeners, j- j- in a sense, the visceral nature of what you did experience when you got down to that tube train?
Um, okay, so as we walked down the tunnel towards the train, not knowing what we were going to, still not knowing what we were going to, this is just me and Sam, with very little light and pathetic torches, the ones you recharge in the fridge, which did nothing. Um, I can remember two men walking towards me, one with a pink jumper and one with a yellow jumper on. Spoke to me for a couple of minutes. You could see down the middle of their jumpers was black, but the rest was pink, and the other one was yellow, where their coats, I think they'd either taken their coats off because it was so hot, or maybe they'd been blown off, I don't know. But they're covered in soot, coughing and spluttering, and they cared so much about me and Sam. That's what got to me. They cared so much. They kept saying to me, "Don't go in there, don't go in there, son. You don't need to be in there, son. You don't need to be in there." We nicknamed them the golfers because they looked like a couple of golfers because of the jumpers and they had big bellies. Um, and we carried on. I directed them towards the platform where we'd come from, and we carried on in. And then we were directed by a colleague of ours to Sam and Lee, Samantha Badham and Lee Harris. And Sam and Lee they'd been blown out of the train when the bomb was detonated. They'd gone through the wall of the train, hit the tunnel wall. The train was moving when he detonated, hit the tunnel wall, and then they'd been rotated like this between the train and the tunnel wall until the train came to a stop. So they were 3 carriages back from the bombed carriage, but they were down on next to the tracks by the wheels of the train. So you're in a tight space about as wide as your shoulders. Um, and they had devastating injuries. Devastating injuries. There was a dead body as well, about 10 feet from them. Um, Sam had had her right leg amputated, amongst other horrific injuries. We didn't have tourniquets or blast dressings then. We didn't have radios for comms. I remember I cut off my left trouser leg to make a makeshift tourniquet, which didn't do anything, but you felt like you had to try and do something. We gave them lots of intramuscular tramadol. It's the only pain relief we had at the time. One of the HEMS paramedics who I knew well, Phil Nation, came. He gave ketamine to both of them because the legs, Sam's left leg and Lee's right leg, they were lying next to each other. Their legs, where they'd been spun, had been wound round each other like a girl's plait 3 or 4 times, and we had to undo their legs. And that was horrific. That was horrific because the drugs we gave, I don't think did anything because they just screamed. They just screamed. And then the underground staff brought 2 World War II stretchers that they had on the stations then on the trains, and we loaded Sam and Lee. Sam made it very clear to me amazingly they were both conscious and amazingly they could both speak. But I had to talk very quietly into Sam's ears so she could hear me. If I shouted, she didn't hear me at all. But if I spoke like I am now, she could hear me. And I said, "Sam, we're going to take you out of here now." And she squeezed my hand tightly. And I leant in so she could talk to me. And she said, "Please, you won't leave me, Adam, will you?" And I said, "I'm not going to leave you while we're in the tunnel, Sam. No, we're not. But when we get upstairs, I'm going to have to pass you on to some of my colleagues. And I've got to come back down here." And she seemed okay with that. But I promised not to leave her in the tunnel. And then I carried Sam out towards the King's Cross platform with, I think it was a police officer and a member of the underground staff, a lady in her 60s. We carried Sam out. My crewmate Sam stayed, well, he helped us initially, then he went back to help with Lee Harris, and they took Lee Harris out the Russell Square end. As we got to the platform with Samantha Badham, we placed her on the platform, and one of the fire brigade managers really upset me, just the way he spoke about her. He implied that she should be in a body bag. And I lost it, mate. I lost it. Completely lost it. I went for him. It's pathetic. Absolutely. Sitting here now saying that I picked a fight. He was about 6'5". I mean, I'm 5'10". It was, and I, I was 33 at the time. But you remember me then. I was not a fighter, and I never have been. It was pathetic, but I was, like I said the other day, my brain was functioning like thalamic level. Yeah, I had no higher function than an angry gorilla, and that's what I became. I just became this useless idiot. Policeman was pulling me off, and it was just stupid schoolboy crap. Um, and then when I went back to Sam, she died, and that's what sticks with me is that I let go of her hand, mate. Let go of her. I had one job. I had one job. That's everything she'd been through. Everything she'd been through that day. I had one poxy, easy job that a 5-year-old could have done. Held her hand and not let go. And I let go to have a fight with an inanimate object. And she died while I did that. And that's my trauma to live with now. And because of that, I think I've never forgotten her. Never. Think about Sam every day.
Yeah, that's powerful, Adam. And sort of even just reliving that story, I think, is a powerful reminder that, like you said, we kind of join up for this patient care above everything, and sometimes that's not clinical. That's just being human and holding hands. There's nothing more complicated than that.
All she wanted.
Yeah, indeed. No, indeed. That story really, I guess, in a way, just frames the context and how challenging the context was, and how much of it was just hell on earth, absolutely at that stage.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. I wondered, Adam, if we could just come to um, some of the critical lessons learned from other major incidents like Manchester. So the Manchester Arena bombing response, and indeed the subsequent coroner's inquiry and national inquiry, um, did give some critical lessons learned. Could I get you to sort of speak to some of those that you've kind of mused on and indeed taught on?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I wasn't at Manchester, and I wasn't at the coroner's inquest, but as I said, I deliver this human factors talk now, so I've read up a lot on the coroner's inquest for Manchester because I was curious just to see would it read similar to 7/7, and it does, which is 12 years later. It's 12 years later. So again, there was a lack of communication and a lot of confusion. Only three out of, well, I know 55 ambulances turned up at the arena. So I'm doing some basic maths and getting 110 clinicians from that. Three, three went into the city hall, the city room, which was the same as the carriage at 7/7. Only three because of the usual failings and understandable failings regarding safety. People worried about secondary devices and not going in, not committing, waiting for the words, is it safe? Is it safe? Is it safe? You and I agreed the other day, asking the phrase on a day like that, asking is it safe is meaningless, pointless, waste of time. There's not a person in the world at an event like that will be able to reply to you, yes, it's safe, go in. The reason why? It's not safe. You know, when I was standing in the bombed out carriage at 7/7 waist high in body parts, if you'd said to me, if you'd come in and said, Ad, do you feel safe at the moment? I would have said, mate, no, no, I don't feel safe at all, but we've got to be here. So we need to be asking, what have we done to mitigate risk? What have we done to reduce risk as much as we can? How's the risk looking? So Manchester, the police were already on scene because they were there for the concert when it ended. They were policing the concert. So the police they'd been calling out for ages, saying, "Where are the we need ambulances to the city room." One paramedic went in, Patrick Ennis. He self-activated, who went straight into the city room, and two heart paramedics followed him later. Um, so of the 110 clinicians, three responded. So there was also a poor response from Gold. They were holding resources back too long at RVPs. They were using loose language, as I said, like, is it safe, and come to scene. Now, King's Cross. So if I said to you, Owen, tomorrow, let's meet at King's Cross, would you know exactly where I meant that you and I would meet? No, you won't, because it's bloody enormous. There's four sides, and each side is probably about the length of a football pitch. So we would pinpoint, wouldn't we? So we'll come to King's Cross, this road, this entrance, this exit, blah, 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 wouldn't we? So scene was big. Come to scene. Well, Manchester, they got confused with the scene being between the city room, Hunt's Bank, which is where the RVP ended up being, the second RVP, and the first RVP was Manchester, was a fire station zero point 0.7 miles away from the arena. So when police were saying, can we have ambulances to scene, that being the city room where the bodies and dying were, the ambulance control was saying, yep, we've got ambulances on their way. But they were, in their heads, that was to the fire station nearly a mile away. So the language needs to tighten up. There was no shared situational awareness at all. The tri-services didn't or couldn't share information with each other. There were informal arrangements going on with silver staff in the control room and mates they've got who they were phoning at home and saying there's an incident, do you want to come in, and stuff like this. So people were inserting themselves into bronze roles that weren't on the on-call rota, which caused confusion later on. A senior clinician wasn't really criticised by a barrister, but the barrister asked the question, a clinician as senior as you, as experienced like you and me, I suppose, with the level of years of experience, was it really the best place for you to be in charge of parking? And you have to agree with that barrister. It just doesn't make sense. So it was all the same stuff 12 years on.
Yeah, indeed, and it's profound. Like you said, it's the lessons learned there. But to your point about having lessons learned, actually learning the lessons
They're
is the
saying
key
the
thing.
words. They're saying the
Indeed,
words.
indeed.
How often do you hear this with MPs in
Yeah,
inquiries? Lessons will be learned. Lessons will be learned. And then it happens again 5 years later.
yeah,
Lessons will be learned. Lessons will be learned. Go. It's just words, isn't it?
yeah,
It's just
yeah, yeah, yeah.
pure words to shut people up.
Yeah,
What
exactly.
did
And
you actually learn?
yeah, well, exactly, and I think it's difficult because, like you said, it's there is if there's no tripartite working, there's no
Yeah.
multi service working,
Yeah.
and also we it needs to not be multi service working at the time of an incident. There needs to be plenty of training multi service working. But to your earlier point, Adam, around these incidents happen progressively, even if there is a significant point of wounding or point of injury or blast, there's a progressive response both from the fire brigade, from the police, and from the ambulance service. So actually, if we are going to train as we fight, we can't just all hit the stopwatch and all be there at the scene, at the right scene, at the same time, and then progress all in tabards. Or it needs to be this phased response, which is
Yeah.
far more mimicked towards
Yeah.
reality, and then maybe even look at a comms cut and how would we operate if the comms were cut, and move, and you
Oh,
know
this is my biggest bugbear, and this is where my bosses raise their eyebrows at me and moan about me, but I'm sure they're still fond of me. I hope. They I say in every single training session we do with the fire brigade and police, my same argument always comes up. It's not real because we know it's coming. We all know why we're here. We all have the right kit. We're all dressed for it. We've all had breakfast, for goodness sake, together, discussing it before the incident starts, before a whistle is blown and the major incident begins, in quotes, because it isn't, not because they don't happen. So my training, what I would love to see is don't tell us. Don't tell us. Have us working our normal shifts, being operational, and hit the button. Hit the button, and let's just see who turns up. Let's see who turns up and what happens. Then you'll have that confusion. You'll probably have an element of fear because they won't have been expecting it. They'll be wondering what's going on. And you'll get the drip fed response of a car arriving, then a truck 5 minutes later, then another truck five. When we do the training, all the ambulances are parked in a car park, waiting for their perfect call signs to be called in, and they all arrive together. Just doesn't happen that way. So that's training for me. That would be training. Hit the button when we're not ready for it.
Yeah, indeed, indeed, indeed. Just looking at red flags,
Oh, I love this.
that people, yeah, that people could look out for when determining
Yeah,
if an incident might escalate. I just actually want to come back to an earlier point you said about, this thalamic response. You disengage your
absolutely.
active brain, your cognition goes to pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is this the semblance of triage my revelation was two people is actually useful because what you can do is just bounce ideas around going through me and Ken going through the
Yeah.
tube train. We could
Yeah.
actually work together
Well,
and actually,
that's a HEMS approach. That's your HEMS background there kicking in. That's what
yeah.
HEMS, you two bounce off each other all the time, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I just don't think it is fundamental now as far as, TST, 10-second triage it's designed to be a lot simpler, a lot easier to
I
follow.
think it's great. Yeah. I think
Yeah, and it needs to be complex maths in these situations, simple maths in these situations, going down the right escalator in these situations
exactly. Exactly.
is challenging.
Yeah. If you said to me, tell me about, when I was knee deep, tell me about the policy. Not only would I just stare at you for 5 seconds, wondering who you were, even though I would have known you for years, I would then say, right, the policy's written on paper. Um, I'm not sure I know what paper is at the moment. I think it
Yeah,
comes from trees. That's the level I was at. Now, look,
yeah,
maybe I'm a moron, Owen, and it was just me. But from speaking to others, they were the same. So
yeah.
yeah, it's the idea of having higher thinking in an environment like that is and when I've just critiqued Manchester, and again, it sounds like I'm slagging them off. I'm not. My whole point is everybody's going to fail. Of course
Mm.
they failed. We're all going to fail on that day. It's designed to fail, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
We're setting ourselves up to fail. That's
Yeah,
the trouble.
it's just super challenging, Adam, super challenging.
The
There
red
is
flag. Sorry, mate, I interrupted you.
no, indeed, no, not at all, not at all. And there is red flags. One of the issues we were looking at from a control room perspective is looking at obviously the aggregation, of course, quickly on a screen on a CAD system, a computer assisted dispatch system, whereby you start to see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 calls,
Yeah,
and then this cluster of calls, and you quite quickly you can start to and just listening into some. Even when you're right, there's an absence of normality, and this is nothing more complex than people screaming down the phone at you,
yeah.
rather than a coherent, calm conversation, or indeed anything in between. But could I get you to speak to? And there is also part of the challenge is a lot of major incidents are different types of attacks, different types of even industrial. So they might not be, it might not be a formal terrorist attack. But could I get you to speak to sort of some red flags? One of the interesting ones I was observing is that actually if it's a hazmat incident, there's going to be a lot of people maybe coughing. There's going to be a lot of respiratory pathology you're going to see. You might even see in different contexts dead birds or dead animals or dead fish. So there is signifiers in and around the environment, that either on scene or removed from the scene, you can kind of get a semblance that to your earlier point, there's just some deviation of normality. There's something not normal.
Yeah, so red flags are massive. Red flags. We don't do enough about red flags, and in particular impending doom. We learn about impending doom when we're learning to become ambulance technicians and paramedics, don't we? We're told, and somebody having a myocardial infarction will have chest tightness and be sweating and nauseated, and they will have impending doom. They don't tell you what the signs and symptoms of impending doom are, do they? Because again, I've never been to an MI ever who said to me, "Oh, it really hurts. It's really tight, and oh gosh, it's like someone sitting on my chest." And also, I've got a terrible feeling of impending doom. Definitely, definitely. That doesn't happen, but they behave in a way that shows us impending doom. In fact, they actually behave like cocks, to be perfectly honest. I've been to, I can think of three patients off the top of my head with three different pathologies that presented with the same impending doom, in that one was an MI, one was an asthma attack, one was a tension pneumothorax. And all three of them presented by removing their clothing. All three of them removed their clothes before I got there. All three of them behaved like wankers towards me. They just were, aggressive, angry with me because I wasn't getting it. I just wasn't understanding what was going on for them. They were irrational. They were bad-tempered. So we need to think more about these things. I'm glad you've asked about red flags, because major incidents, just like an MI and an asthma attack, and they the other example I gave, sorry, I forgot. They will have red flags. So major incidents will have red flags. Reduced comms, there's your red flag. The 909s have lit up. Behavior of the public. 7-7, the public were running into UCH, not telling us why, just saying you need to be at King's Cross, and then running off. That doesn't happen on a normal day. The head nurse at UCH coming to find me, asking me to call control to find out why two of her doctors couldn't get to work because the underground had stopped working. That doesn't happen every day. Lots of car horns sounding, people beeping their horns because they're driving around red lights because they want to get away from what they've seen outside King's Cross. So, and traffic breaking the law. Burglar alarms go off, particularly with bomb blasts. You get loads of burglar alarms going off. People crying, people removing their clothing as they're running down the road, police officers crying. They're human beings as well. People removing their clothing, I've just said. So there's all these red flags of major incident. They're subtle, but they're there. And you'll realize something, you're going to realize it's something different is happening. It's going to be in your face that's going on, but it's gonna take some time for you to realize this is a major incident. But all those things I've just said, when you add them all together, they usually equal something big.
Something big and something.
Life changing.
Yeah, indeed,
Yeah.
indeed, indeed. Adam, can I get you to speak to? So, we, I think what we'll do is we'll save, and we've spoken about methane on other podcasts, and the formal response and the shared situation awareness, which is prudent to, like you say, you've got to shared situation awareness is an evolving thing, as you were saying, and it's actually over time,
Yeah.
like the OODA loops, the orientation of OODA loops, it just takes time to orientate to yourself to, and indeed, we spoke on the other podcast about when you're at King's Cross or when you're at Aldgate or where you don't know it's going to be two, three, four bombs. You think it could be five, six, seven. You haven't got the beauty of hindsight, and you don't also grasp the enormity of what's happening. The
No.
fact that there was a bomb in Edgware and it had its own issues. The fire brigade not attending that one, or there was lots of microcosm issues, and so you don't necessarily get that shared situation awareness until post-event, even on
Mm,
your own incident.
absolutely.
Could I get you to speak to the danger of groupthink in these incidents? Because groupthink can be profound on the emergency services during critical incidents, and having breaking that groupthink, I think is absolutely necessary. Could I get you to speak to that?
Yeah, so groupthink is a sort of a new thing, it's a psychological sort of phenomenon. It occurs when you get a group of people making an irrational decision in order to reach harmony. Yeah, it can happen in many settings, business, politics, education, anywhere. And the symptoms of groupthink are that there's this illusion of invulnerability. So the group believes that their decision is untouchable and they rationalize it. They use incorrect logic to justify their decision. They stereotype, they ignore, or they demonize people who challenge their idea, their theology, if you like. They self-censor, so they hide the doubts they're having. They hide their misgivings from the group, and there's pressure for conformity, and that they'll set aside their own beliefs to adopt the group's opinion. Why? Why do they do this? Well, fear of the boss can be one. A bit of ass kissing sometimes as well. They want their next promotion, so just agree with the boss, even though it's a bad idea. Tiredness, long, lengthy meetings where these decisions are being made and they're exhausted and they've told their other half they'll be home at 6 and it's 5:30 and they still haven't come to a decision, so they'll rush to a bad decision, not understanding what's being asked of them, but too embarrassed to be the one who puts their hand up and says, I don't get it. You know, that's a big deal. It's a big thing to do, isn't it? Remember, everyone always says there's no such thing as a stupid question, but you sit there thinking, well, my question will be fucking stupid, so I'm not going to ask it. Um, Groupthink creates bad policy. Groupthink is dangerous, and it goes on a lot. It goes on a lot, and I don't know what the answer to groupthink is, but I think it's just to be aware of it. And when you're at one of these incidents, just have a little think and to yourself and think, right, am I dealing with a rational decision that's being made here? You know, is it rational for me to organize parking when I know that this incident is 15 minutes old and there's going to be people bleeding out inside that building? Where do I really need to be?
Yeah, no, indeed, indeed, and actually, like you said, kind of breaking that group think, and what I realized quite early on in the formal structure, before the formal structure's set up, it's the action cards for first on scene really should be, and they are, indeed they are, but it really is about, like you said, setting up a triaging system where you're trying to arrest bleeding, going in, opening airways and assessing. But just being mindful that, like you said, if that's not been allocated, your best bet is to not be setting up some of the formal structures in the back end of a major
Yeah,
incident. It's certainly at the front end where, like you say, you can do in a fresh scene, you can do the most for the most by doing that, because the clock is ticking, as you were saying, Adam.
yeah,
People are bleeding out, and the clock is
bleeding out.
ticking.
Yeah.
Could I speak to so one of the profound aspects I and you have experienced, I certainly did at 7/7, is this semblance of imposter syndrome. And just in a way, how have you overcome imposter syndrome, and also just in the aftermath of a major incident, just the effects of trauma, and dealing with that through this sense of feeling like an imposter?
Well, I don't know if I have. I mean, I feel like an imposter sometimes all the time at work. I'm probably not, but it's just you're putting environments where you know it's difficult to train for you because you don't know what's coming and you get very little notice and you're just it's sprung on you. You know, I had a sort of baby the other day with tetralogy of Fallot, and I haven't seen one for about 20 years, and this baby was blue, and it was only when I got the history of it been breastfeeding off the mother and it just triggered that thing from before. So I had imposter syndrome definitely at the beginning because she thought I was there to help, and I was helping, but I just didn't know what to do for this this baby. Well, I knew what to do. I didn't know what was going on until it struck me about the breastfeeding going blue. So yeah, imposter syndrome is this psychological experience where you feel like you're a fraud, isn't it? Either through fear or not having the practical skills or the intellectual failure you've got. The irony being, of course, that intellectually and practically you are qualified intellectually and practically. You just don't feel you are. And you find yourselves in an environment which causes you to doubt yourself, such as a major incident. So for me, the fear of failing, well, you can override that one quite easily with major incidents. That is that I can promise you're going to fail. Okay. If you haven't been to a major incident yet, and if you go to one, trust me, you're going to fail and fail and fail again and then fail again. And with each level you go to, you will fail. You've just got to live with that. No, it's really unlikely that you'll succeed and do well in one of those environments. So from a point of view of fear of failing, we can rule that one out. You're going to fail. Live with it. You're going to suffer imposter syndrome at a major incident because you will fail, as I said. Remember also that the people around you, they're probably experiencing the same experience you are. They're probably feeling like imposters too. And you're all in the same boat. And after the aftermath, how have I dealt with the trauma of being triggered? I'm triggered every day. I'm triggered when I see pink and yellow. I'm triggered by tube trains. I'm triggered by tunnels. I was triggered when I watched Stranger Things with my kids because Stranger Things, they go into that other realm, the upside down world. And for me, walking into that tunnel was that. And I'm triggered by silence because it was so quiet down there. And if I have silence in the house, it just takes me. So I have to sleep with the radio or the TV on, etc. Stuff like this. So imposter syndrome is going to affect all of us. There's not much we can do about it, I don't think, except stay up to date, keep reading, stay current, and yeah, just recognize that you will fail.
So just looking at just really where, and this is something I'd love to pass apart with you around the balance between sort of following policy and decision making on the ground during high stress situations like major incidents. Part of the interplay, I think, Adam, is that you have the most information on the ground. It's not the control room, certainly not in the initial phases, because you're at the front end. You are garnering what anecdotally is playing out in front of you. So you're dealing with that, and you have to relay that in some formulaic fashion. But could I get you to speak to just that dynamic decision-making process on the ground, policy or no policy, versus actually, being fully compliant to the word, the letter of a policy?
So when Sam and I arrived, we knew that outside the ticket hall wasn't where we needed to be. We knew something devastating had happened, but we didn't know what. We were assuming a train crash, but we didn't know that. But we knew that's not where we needed to be because people were too well there. So we knew we had to get to the scene, if you like, and it ended up being the carriage, the front carriage. So you just need to keep moving forward. You need to keep directing the walking wounded, do something with them. They're probably not going to listen to you, but just give them an instruction. Maybe they'll follow it, maybe they won't. Some may just follow you. You might have to get quite verbal with them and tell them not to. You need to keep moving forward, get to that scene as quickly as you can. Give a report if you can. We've got comms now, we've got radios, so it's easier to do. We've got a dedicated radio channel that works underground, which is much, much better. So we're more likely to be able to give earlier reports. It's going to be tough. you've got to manage your own emotions, which is hard because you're not really in a position to manage anything. But you've got to try and manage your own emotions. You've got to try and manage your own fitness while you're down there. Going back to the heat, we took off everything we could to be as cool as possible, but it's very difficult. We hadn't had breakfast that morning, so we became dehydrated quite quickly. Sam, my crewmate, got a terrible headache. Try and gain an overview as much as you can. If you see a police officer that's able to function, that's able to talk to you, try and gather some information from them if you can. I think well, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking to myself, this will all fail, but because it always has. But this is what we need to try and do. We need to move forward, get to the dead and dying, because they are there and they're bleeding out all the time. They're bleeding out, and that's where we need to be. Move forward, try and gather as much information as we can as we're moving forward. What we should not be doing is stopping. We shouldn't be stopping and lingering in one area unless that area is full of people who are bleeding out. That's what we shouldn't be doing, is stopping or going backwards to perform other roles. We need to move forward, try and get some control, try and stem the flow of blood, turn off the tap, and then our bandwidth will open when we've got some control, and then we can start putting in the systems in place to start moving these people out. But if we're not getting there as quickly as we can, then what's the point of the policy, really? If everyone's bled out, why are we going? What's the point? So reality versus policy, well, how long have you got? Says the policy at the moment says first on scene, don't treat. I have an issue with that personally. I would treat and always have treated. It doesn't cover fear, as I've said before. It doesn't cover confusion and pressure. You won't be able to have critical thinking. Forget it. Your bandwidth's going to fail. You won't be able to gain an overview. You won't have effective comms. Hopefully you will now, but you didn't then. And good luck managing your own emotions.
Yeah, it's super challenging actually in multiple regards. Could I get you to speak to? We'll come into land, Adam. A couple more questions really. One would be just how major incidents like the Brixton nail bomb, 7/7, and indeed the Manchester Arena attack have shaped emergency response protocols to your mind in the UK. Have you seen any evolution in the protocols?
Yeah, definitely. And again, as I always say, it sounds like I'm slagging it off. I'm not. My argument is it won't be allowed to happen. Bandwidth won't allow it. Human factors won't allow it. The policy's brilliant. I know the guy who writes it. He's well read. He's brilliant on the topic, and I agree with every word. My argument is put yourself in hell and then try and read it. Yeah. But so yeah, since these incidents, so yeah, as I said, we've now got digital radios, which we now have not personal issue, but on the ambulances. So we have comms, even if we're separated, we have comms. We have a dedicated channel that works underground with the other emergency services. We've now got tourniquets and blast dressings, and in relation to the department I work with now, each car's got lots of that equipment. So we get there, we're much more able to turn the tap off. We have 24/7 operational managers who can come and perform those bronze roles, so clinicians don't have to. We have TRU, the people I work for. We have 10-second triage. We've introduced type into the major incident definition. So before it was whenever demand outweighs supply. Now type is in there, so you can have one patient. But if the nature of their injury is going to affect a city like Salisbury with the Skripals, Novichok, it's a major incident. But you've got very few numbers, but it's a major incident because we've introduced type very sensibly. Intelligence sharing is better. I'm not privy to this stuff, but from reading, MI5 and the police, they share more information now. They share photos and they reassess people who were considered to be low risk before. Together, they're reassessing them. MI5, MI6, GCHQ, they work more closely together now, looking at digital footprints and behavior like that, online behavior. Ambulances, we have a predetermined response now, a computer predetermined response to a declaration of a major incident of 20 ambulances, 10 managers. So a computer will send us. So computers don't get bandwidth failure. They crash, but they don't get bandwidth failure like human beings do. A number of tube stations now, if the underground is affected by the major incident, big cause of delays on 7-7 was ambulances, as we said before, going to wrong locations. Each tube station now has a specific meeting point, as well as an individual code number with exact coordinates on it as well. And every station and all the tunnels have unique numbers so they can easily be identified. The underground, they operate now gold, silver, and bronze like the emergency services do for their major instruments. So it should tally. If the power goes down, the underground staff, they now can get the police to come and drive their vehicles to scene on blue lights for them, so they can get to scene to turn off power for us much quicker. There's multi-casualty first aid kits all over London. I think 170 locations all over London. Key agencies trained together. So we've done a lot. We've done a lot to try and improve and make it better. And I think it will help on the day. And it'll certainly help with prevention. But a lot of this, certainly from the point of view of communication, we've made good advances that should help on the day. Yeah, hopefully will be more effective.
And just finally, Adam, could I get you to speak to just the advice you give staff, really, both paramedics and emergency responders, any ambulance staff, really, just to effectively manage their mental health and resilience when dealing with these incidents? I have very much sought therapy in the past, counselling. It's done me well, actually, and it's been. I almost, my self-reflection was I didn't realize I needed it and as much as I did until I came out of counselling. And that was my revelation of how profound it actually was. Could I get you to speak to how you've managed it yourself?
Yeah, so look, I am not a counsellor, and this has worked for me. It may not work for others, but it's worked for me. I had counselling after 7-7 with a lovely lady. Went to about 5 sessions. She was lovely, but I didn't feel I could tell her what I could tell you. One, it was too soon, and the other is she wasn't you. She wasn't a paramedic. She wasn't working with us. I've no doubt she could have handled everything I would have told her, but it was my inadequacies that made me feel like I couldn't tell her. But for me, I've just realized that it's my trauma, it's my disease. It's me who let Sam down that day, and I have to own that. And I can't change that. There's nothing anyone can do to change the fact I let go of her hand. Nothing. There's nothing anyone can do for all the failures I made that day. I just have to own it and try and be better on each next one. I say in my talk, we have to look ourselves in the mirror, even 20 years on, when you're brushing your teeth, or if you've got hair, combing your hair. I don't have the bouffant you have, Owen, but I still have a bit of hair. You have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and look back and think, what did I do that day? We moan as paramedics. We moan all the time, don't we? We moan about going to shit, about, oh, I'm going to shit. This is why I didn't train for this, blah, blah, blah. We hear it all the time. And then a day like this comes up and we go and we sort out parking or loading. Can you look yourself in the mirror 20 years later and think, well, look, I failed, but at least I went in. At least I went in. At least I was with some of them when they breathed their last. Just some of them went alone. I worry sometimes about mental health in the ambulance service with some of the staff we have now. I am concerned by their mental health because they do seem more anxious and worried than we did back then. I'm going to 99-year-old patients in cardiac arrest who've just died. And there's a resus protocol taking place for some reason. And when that 99-year-old is pronounced, end of life, or we terminate the resus, I'm seeing tears from some of my colleagues, some of these people, and I'm just thinking, gosh, if you're getting upset by this, I mean, personally, I cry when we get ROSC on those patients. That's when I cry. Uh, but if you're crying when one of these lovely, they've had their life, they're 99, strap in for 7-7. Strap in, my friend, because fucking hell, you're going to get hit with a mallet, a big fucking mallet. So strap in hard. And so ask yourself, am I in the right job? If you don't like dog shit, don't be a dog walker, would you? Why would you be a dog walker if you don't like dog shit? And I also often talk about this magic pill. If a psychiatrist said to me tomorrow, here's a magic pill, Adam, take it once. All the pain go forever, all the sleepless nights, all the fear of silence, all the sleeping with the radio on, and all that business. It'll go. You won't. You'll forget all about how you let all those people down. It's not what. There's gun to my head. I would never swallow that pill, Owen. Never. What kind of selfish, self-centered wanker would I have to be to sit there and say my day was worse than hers? My day was worse than theirs that day. I can still breathe. I've got arms and legs. I can walk. I've had children. I've had marriage. I've got life. They didn't get any of that. So how dare I feel sorry for myself? How dare I? So no, I would never, ever swallow that pill. So if you're able to, for me, this works. Own it. Almost celebrate it. I know that sounds mad, but celebrate the fact you tried. You tried,
Indeed. And to your point, Adam, it changes you fundamentally as a person. It's changed me. That and other incidents as well that I've spoken about on the podcast have changed me, and I would never wish to be, for lack of a better term, unchanged by some of these situations, because I think it brings a sense of humanity and a perspective to the current situation. And like you said, when you self-deprecate, you just have to think for a second, hold on, what privilege do I have to live each day out with all four limbs, with, a significant other, with relationships intact, with, all this stuff that other people don't.
Yeah.
So bearing witness to this atrocity sometimes actually gives you a depth of perspective that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And yeah, it's profound. It's profound.
It is, mate. It is. Yeah. I think, just to finish, sorry, mate, just the issue with the policy is it's a well-worded, unemotional document written in an unemotional time about a very, very emotional event. And that's why we're going to struggle with it, is that we won't be able to do that, because it's a, on the day, it's personal experience, it's overwhelmingly emotional, and you're not going to have an analytical mind to be able to process words.
Listen, that's profound. Thank you so much, Adam, for the last hour and a half, really, of your time. It's been great to catch up with you again. It's also just great just to get your anecdotal thoughts and experience. So thank you.
It's my pleasure, mate. Anytime.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.